Right. Welcome everyone to our webinar today titled Hybrid E-Learning or vILT, the Cloud Training Face-Off. My name is Jeremy Price and I will be your host and MC for this discussion. I'm a cloud architect here at Cloud Academy and I spend my days helping build and deliver workshops on technical topics to help our learners dive deeper into the content. With me today for our discussion, I have Caitlyn Funk and Brandon Henry. Caitlyn, would you like to tell the folks at home about yourself?
Sure, absolutely. So again, hi, my name's Caitlyn Funk. I have worked in the technical learning and development space for, several years now, mainly supporting large programs for large enterprise clients with several thousand tech learners. And I have delivered some successful programs and have been able to watch those unfold in all of the different modalities that we are going to touch on today. So looking forward to our conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Caitlyn. Brandon, would you like to tell everybody about yourself?
Yeah, thanks, Jeremy. Hey, everyone. Nice to meet you. I'm Brandon Henry, Senior Customer Success Manager here at Cloud Academy. I work with some of our largest enterprise customers on a daily basis, helping them with engagement and getting the most out of the platform. Look forward to today.
Awesome. Thanks, Brandon. Appreciate it. So some really interesting stuff we have to talk about today. For folks listening in, throughout our discussion today, if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature of the GoToWebinar to submit your questions, and we'll answer those, as many of those as we can as we're going through our session. The session is going to be recorded, so you can refer back to it. Today's topic is one that we know is on the mind of many of our customers. In our ever-changing landscape of learning and development and technical training, which of the modalities of training is best? And how do we optimize that for our learners, for our finance folks, for our leaders? So without further ado, let's dive into our discussion. So for our discussion today, we're going to be using a couple of terms. I want to set the stage with those. We're going to be talking about various modalities of training delivery. When we talk about e-learning, what we're referring to is the learning that's available on demand for learners to consume at their own pace. When we're talking about that virtual instructor-led training, we're referring to sessions that are led by an instructor that must be attended either in person or virtually by the students, and it provides that venue for live instruction and question and answer sessions. The blended learning or hybrid approach mixes e-learning and virtual instructor-led training to accelerate and create accountability in the learning journey, as well as ensure that learning time investment is optimized. All right, so now that we got the definitions out of the way, let's start with some of our discussion questions. And what I want to start with is this evolving landscape of corporate technical training. It evolves very quickly. So Caitlyn, I want to start off with you. What are the most significant changes you've observed in the landscape of corporate cloud training?
Wow, yeah, it's a great question. And I think even just since, COVID and 2020, we've seen so many changes to the landscape that we're all working in. So I guess some of the most notable that I would start by calling out are number one, obviously with COVID, that increase in remote learning. I know within even just the instructor-led training space, for example, we went from being, 95% right in person prior to COVID for a lot of organizations, sending folks to conferences, going to in-person sessions, the like. And then when COVID happened, we switched, almost completely, did a 180 to being 95% virtual or online. And that did really change the landscape because I think organizations really were able to appreciate some unintended benefits from that type of a shift, right? Folks on distributed teams who maybe didn't really get to interface much were suddenly face to face with each other in that virtual setting, which had some really great, impact. So that would be a really big one is, kind of the shift into virtual learning and how we create that effective, learning experience. But also, I think another huge shift that we should call out for our discussion is around really the shift away from that sort of one size fits all training, right? Rather than just having one approach or one type of training for an entire organization across the board, we're starting to see a more personalized and tailored approach, right? Where, thanks to advancements in technology, thanks to advancements in the sophistication of the organizations that we're working with, we see a lot more tailored and personalized training that really addresses individuals and their skill gaps. So, really exciting stuff.
I love that. Going from kind of the one size fits all mentality of like, here's your training, take it or leave it, to now being really individualized in that approach. I love that. Those are
Exactly.
some pretty cool changes. And that shift that you mentioned is pretty significant, right? That's going from in person to online has been a really radical change in the way that we've deployed that. Another question for you then. What are some of the key differences of cloud training compared to just that general blanket corporate training? And why is that important for technical staff?
That's a really good question. I would say, so your tech learners in particular within an organization, right, are they have a very specific type of training that's going to be the most effective for them. And the main difference that I would call out specifically is that tech learners in particular have a very distinct need for continuous learning. So for example, while I could take a class on, leadership skills or, something along those lines, and that content or that knowledge would be fresh for me for a number of years, tech learners are in a unique, kind of a unique position, right? Because they're having to constantly evolve alongside the landscape, right? If you're looking at, advancements in technology across even, 2 or 3 year period, so much has shifted so that tech learners really need to stay on top of that continuous learning. The other difference about tech learners, and this is a pretty interesting one as well, is that they're some of the busiest people in your organization, right? They don't have time to devote, um, you know, tons and tons of time every single day to training, and so it's really important that we kind of match those two things up, right? The need for continuous learning, but also the understanding that tech learners have a lot on their plate already.
I like that. It's a great call out of making learning a first class citizen, because if you're not growing in your tech skills, you're falling behind, right? Stuff is coming out
Absolutely.
constantly. Things that didn't exist last year are now the new hotness that everybody is using to implement their systems. So yeah, great points. Thank you. All right, Brandon, I have a couple questions to send your way. First up,
Sure.
I know you've done a lot of work with different organizations to understand and help them understand some of the key metrics that are important to measure. So what key metrics would you recommend for organizations to focus on when they're measuring the ROI of cloud or technical training programs?
Yeah, great question, Jeremy. For this is a question I get a lot, but it always depends on the organization. For professional service customers, it could be as simple as your users collecting certifications and CPEs, which at the end of the day is a certificate, it's tangible, and they have the result right there. But let's say, for some of our financial services, media, healthcare, oil and gas customers, uh, the certifications are more of a nice to have, but they really care more about the specific skills. So what I would say in general is that you want about 30% or 30 to 40% of your organization at the intermediate skill level. This way you'll have leaders who can complete a task effectively. They could, train others whenever new hires start. So yeah, I would say about 30 to 40%. But then the question comes, well, how do you measure that? How do you actually know if this user is at a intermediate skill level? And there's a bunch of tools and mechanisms out there that we could talk about. But essentially, what you want to do is get a baseline, understand what your user's current skill level is, deploy the training, and then measure the results of that.
Great point that it is tailored and individualized per the company, per market segment, per all of those things, right? The things that are important to one aren't necessarily important to the other ones. That's great. That, at the end of the day, it is about measuring the success, but how we get there and what we measure are definitely different. I love your point on the certifications also, that like for some organizations, those are really important, but for others, not quite so much. So I like that balance. Awesome. So following along with that, I know you've worked with a lot of our customers in this realm, right? As you said, it is the most asked question probably that you get, but can you share a success story where understanding that ROI made a tangible difference?
Yeah. So, I'll take one of my professional service companies, for example. They had very aggressive goals. In the next 2 years, they, had to achieve something like 3,500 certification across all major cloud platforms. We're talking Azure, AWS, Google, and even ancillary services like Kubernetes and Terraform. So, what we did is we implemented a program where we had the self-paced training, but we supplemented that with some success services like exam preps, master classes, and live lab challenges where the users could get some of that those hands-on experience with the tools. So the feedback from this was overwhelmingly positive. They were 2 years in; they're 50% of the way at their to their Azure certifications, 50% of the way to their Google certifications, and 65% of the way to their AWS certification goals. Now, anyone who partners out there with AWS, you may be aware of an AWS discount program. So they actually receive a credit back every time they get a user certified at the associate or professional level. So that's not only cost savings; they are able to demonstrate the capabilities to win more business, but they also have one of the major vendors giving them a kickback every time a user gets certified.
Love it. Nothing more tangible than a credit on your bill to show that, right, that learning and that skill attainment is really valuable, right? Not to put a dollar amount on it, but it is kind of nice to have that. Very
Yeah,
cool.
let me share one more example. We do have a customer that it's not certification based or CPE based, but it's really all about the skills. So what they do is they leverage our platform just to target the skills that will be able to help them resolve their tickets in most efficient way possible. So they take that skills report, they see which users are most effective at certain areas, whether that's compute, databases, security, whatever the ticket is that's coming in. They then route those tickets to that user, and those users are able to complete those tickets in record time, right? So that's also another cost-saving benefit from just targeting specific skills and getting the user the hands-on experience they need, so that there's an actual outcome to your business.
I love that. And there's a secondary piece to that too, right? Where their customers who are submitting those tickets are happier because the right person got the ticket to work on it, they had the skills, they had the knowledge to be able to solve it. So I love that. That one's cool. It's really cool. Excellent. So we've been talking a little bit about kind of the landscape of corporate training, a little bit about the ROI of that, some key metrics, understanding a little bit about how some of our customers are currently measuring that success and seeing that success. Wanted to take a small pivot here and talk about, one of the things that happens when we're talking about corporate training is we communicate the needs of the training, and sometimes that's an L&D organization, maybe it's leadership, sometimes it's technical folks or technical management. And we have to take that communicated need and create optimized solutions based on it. So in that realm, Caitlyn, a question for you. Can you talk a little bit about how important psychological safety is in this realm of communicating those training needs and optimized solutions? How important is psychological safety for building that culture of learning?
That's a great question, and I love this topic so much because it's so crucial, I think, to building a successful culture of learning. For those who maybe aren't as familiar, psychological safety refers to the concept that, I as a learner can get out there, I can take risks, I can be a beginner at learning new skills, I can make mistakes, I can fail, and I can do all of that without any fear of repercussions. From above, right? I can get out there and really feel comfortable and free to actually get out there and learn. And I think when that's something that we are able to embed or provide our learners with within the culture of learning that we build at an organization, you see so many amazing outcomes that come out of that, right? Because, at the end of the day, no matter how, much training you provide to your organization or what modalities you provide, it all boils back down to that culture of learning. And so making sure that folks feel safe and not only voicing maybe the skill gaps that they're trying to close, but also, addressing those in a really open and upfront way, I think is huge and is so central to being able to actually close those gaps and achieve better business outcomes in a very real way. So yeah, this is a topic that's definitely near and dear to my heart.
Love it. That's great points in there too. I like earlier we were talking about this return on investment, right? And there's a lot of investment when you're talking learning. It's time, it's money, it's resources. But one of those critical pieces, like you said, that we have to have in place is that culture of learning, and kind of foundational for that is that psychological safety. And on a personal note, as a technical person, I can tell you it is very daunting to say, I'm going to have to put aside this critical task that I'm working on to spend some time learning, to pick up these new technologies, because it feels like you're starting all over again. But creating that psychological safety is critical for those technical folks to know that this is expected. We know that you're going to hit this place, and it's all right. We're here to support that. So I like it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Brandon, I got a question for you. So how does personalization affect that learner engagement and outcomes?
Yeah, I mean, it's much easier to get a new idea to stick when it's something that you're going to interact with on a daily basis. So, in order to increase engagement and retention of the training, it should be relevant to the project seen on a day to day. Maybe this project is being communicated as being on the horizon in corporate meetings. So, being as precise as possible and training specific gaps, your employees will save time by working smarter, more efficiently, and this will in turn produce a positive business outcome. A lot of times you'll see a lot of organizations use consumption as a metric, but if your users could be, learn a skill in an hour and then be successful in their project a month later, wouldn't you rather that than, this, throwing everything at them and seeing what sticks?
I like that. And can you speak a little bit more? You said consumption is a metric. What do you mean by that concept?
Yeah. So when I speak with organizations, a lot of time, they want to see, 10 hours a month from each user, right? And sure, they could train for 10 hours, but what did they really learn? Are they actually working on tools that are going to make them successful in the projects that they're working on, or that you guys are talking about working on in the future, right? So consumption is good sometimes, but if it's not directed and it's not being communicated at a high level what the user should focus on, then it can be a means to an end.
Gotcha. That makes sense. Kind of the age-old question of quantity versus quality, right? I can put in my 10 hours of learning, but it doesn't necessarily align with business goals or job tasks or project needs or something like that, right? It's just checking the box. So yeah, it's a good point. It's one metric in the pile, but not necessarily the one that is highly correlated with success. Awesome. So another question for you, Brandon. Along those lines, what are some of those real world strategies that you've helped customers with, or they brought to you, that have been effective in fostering that culture of continuous learning within organizations?
Yep. So this is always going to boil down to two things. So if there's anything I want the audience to walk away with today, if you want to build a positive learning atmosphere, it's rewards and recognition. That's simple. Just if you can give out rewards, that's great. But most importantly, you should recognize people that are taking time to train. But the first thing is, as a business leader, you have to allow your employees time to train. Whether that's going to be 5% or 10% of the work week, it only equates to maybe 2 or 4 hours, right? So they could train in sprints. They could train for 1 month, take 1 month off. You could do a quarterly sprint, so train for 3 months, maybe 2 hours a week for 3 months, and then take 3 months off. We're people too. It takes a lot of effort to get a certification. It takes a lot of effort to learn a new skill. So you want to give them some breaks, right? You commit a good part of time to training, take a short break. You can also incorporate this in lunch and learns. So, and then afterwards, you need to recognize the people that are actually dedicating the time to upskilling. Let's say you're too busy to come up with a training plan for your organization. Then you need to treat your learning provider as an extension of your L&D team. I've seen organizations where they invited me to the collaboration channels where it's either Teams or Slack, and I'm sharing content updates, responding directly to end users regarding content inquiries. And on a weekly basis, sometimes they'll even ask me to share a leaderboard of total time spent, activities completed, anything that could help, foster, a fun, competitive training atmosphere. And these are just, very simple things you could do, and it's not overly creative at all. That could really help, get a lot of people excited about training.
I love it. And again, kind of tying back to some of the themes from earlier, right? Individualize this. If you have a company culture that has competition at its core, great, like create some competitive pieces. If it's more of a collaborative atmosphere, create those collaborations and really kind of build the training atmosphere to match the corporate culture. I like that. And I know from my own personal experience, we've had some customers invite us to participate in their own like technical conferences, right? They'll do some internal conferences and they invite us to come in and, maybe we talk a little bit more about kind of the vanilla cloud types of stuff, but then they draw that in and tailor it to their own. And that's one more example of where they've built that culture of learning of, hey, we value learning so much, we're going to take a couple of days and make sure that everybody has opportunities to hear about not only the latest and greatest from the tech industry, but also what's going on here in the organization. So I like it, Brandon. Lots of variety there, lots of great ideas folks can take and run with. That's awesome. And tying it back to something that Caitlyn had said earlier about, within the tech realm, it's continuous learning. You can't ever stop learning. You have to keep that going. And so it's not a one and done. And so organizations that are successful at creating that space, creating those incentives for their learners to continuously jump in there and learn, those are those world-class organizations. Awesome. All right, Caitlyn, I got a question for you. And this one is kind of the big one, kind of the elephant in the room for the topic that we're talking about today. Can you tell me a couple of benefits and challenges for each of our three kinds or modalities of learning: e-learning, hybrid, and the vILT formats?
Sure, absolutely. And I'll preface this by saying I'm speaking from my own personal experience here, but if others in the audience or anybody has other thoughts on what they see as the benefits and challenges, please feel free to chime in. I would love to hear those. I guess starting with e-learning, right? So starting with self-paced e-learning, some of the benefits of e-learning are, first and foremost, it's really scalable, right? I can deploy 20, 30, 50,000 licenses across an enterprise organization and have learning in front of people in a way that is really fast and really accessible, right? Along those same lines, there's also a lot of cost effectiveness to something like that, right? There's a lot of cost savings that organizations can gain from that. Some of the other benefits I would say to the e-learning model in particular, which I think became popular, a few years ago, maybe, I don't know, 2016 through 2019, I would kind of say, because it is self-paced, right? You can fit it into your busy schedule. If you're a busy tech learner, right, and you have tons of, projects that you're working on and your day-to-day is really packed, you can do kind of bite-sized learnings and come and go into that training and really fit it into the day-to-day tasks that you're accomplishing as well, which is a big advantage. And the other advantage as well with a platform, for example, like Cloud Academy, is you have more data available around not just things like course consumption, right? Because we talked around kind of the challenges of that as a metric, but also in skill growth. We can see topics that might be of interest, and we get really a lot of interesting quantitative data that can help organizations as a whole shift that needle forward when it comes to key initiatives or closing skill gaps at scale, right? So those are some of the benefits. Now, the challenges with e-learning as a modality, I think, are it really ties down to the there's less feedback and less interaction, right? When I'm taking a self-paced learning course, I can't necessarily, I'm not getting feedback actively from Brandon or from one of my peers on how I'm doing or how this implements in our day-to-day. For that reason, I think learners might still need a little bit of support when it comes to bridging that gap between the domain knowledge, right? Like, okay, what is Kubernetes, and the hands-on application? Okay, so Brandon, how do I use Kubernetes at our organization? So that can be a little bit of a challenge. Yeah, then moving on to instructor-led training. I think the benefits to instructor-led training are, number one, it makes learning really interactive, right? You have that opportunity, like you said before, Jeremy, to raise your hand and ask a live instructor questions, get feedback, present a use case to them, say, hey, I've run into this. It also creates a team building environment, right? If we're all in class together, that can be sort of a networking opportunity and can be really positive for overall company culture. And because there's that added layer of kind of accountability as well, right? Someone's definitely going to notice if I drop out of that Zoom room, right? Versus if I'm doing self-paced learning, not as applicable, right? For that reason, I think instructor-led training can be really effective for time-sensitive initiatives. Say that we are adopting AI as an organization and we have a very specific mission-critical goal that we all need to upskill on quickly. Having that accountability with the instructor leading the charge there in that cohort can really push things along in a way that self-paced learning, finds more challenging. That is instructor-led training. And then for blended learning, our third and final modality here, I think you get a lot of the benefits of both, right? It really is kind of the best of both worlds if it can be executed correctly. The positives or the benefits here would be, number one, the flexibility, right? You get that interactivity with the instructor from being able to raise your hand and ask them questions, but you're still maximizing learner time on their day jobs, which is huge, right? If I'm going through a 6-week program, that's a blended learning program, for example, I don't have to spend all 6 weeks of that in class, which is helpful for me as a learner, being able to continue working on my day-to-day tasks that, my company's paying me to do. The other benefit I would say is customization. We can really lean into and kind of tweak what we spend time on in different modalities. And we can include things like assessments, quizzes, right? To really capture the kind of outcomes that we're going for in a program like that. And another benefit too, I think, is, we know this, right, from just our own individual kind of knowledge, but different people learn different ways, right? I don't necessarily learn the same as Brandon, Jeremy, or as you would. And so when we have that blended learning approach, it can really capture a variety of different modalities that helps the information really sink in and stick. The challenges, now moving over to the challenges, is really around, from my experience, the complexity of coordination and logistics, right? For blended learning to be done well, you really have to have a good understanding of, okay, what is the content that we're having them go through in that self-paced format, and how specifically does that line up with my other modalities, right? Instructor-led training, assessments, quizzes, labs, whatever the case may be. We have to be really seamless in how we thread that whole experience together so that the learner experience is as positive as it can be. And that takes time, right? That takes effort, and that takes somebody who knows the content that folks are going through in both modalities. So I personally, if I was asked to provide my opinion, I think that blended learning and kind of these multiple modalities is definitely the way of the future for many of the reasons I've shared above. But, I think we have to spend that time mastering delivering that type of modality to get the best benefits from it.
Yeah, and that's why it's crucial that you have a learning partner that works as an extension of your L&D team, right? Because you need, as an admin or business leader, you don't have the time to look at all these different modalities, what they're offering, the time they're offering it, You need a CSM who is willing to go in there, do their research, figure out what courses are being offered. When is the live training being offered? What can we assign leading up to that live training? And how are we going to reinforce this training after it's been completed? So yeah, great response, Caitlyn.
I totally agree. Yeah. And it has to be somebody like a CSM who's really just obsessed with that learner experience. That's when you're going to get the best outcomes from blended learning. So relying on a partner, because typically our L&D folks or our tech folks already have their plates full, I think is the best route to go.
Precisely.
Love it. Some great answers in there. And I can tell you, again, personal experience as someone who delivers those virtual instructor-led training courses, the quality of the learning is so much better in the blended because I know that baseline of knowledge that people come into my workshop with. Otherwise, I end up with folks who can barely spell AWS and folks who are like, really, really good at it and they're bored. So making sure, from my perspective, that's a piece of accountability, making sure that everybody who walks into that workshop or that training is on the same level, right? Or at least has that same level of base knowledge. It helps maximize that return on investment. So I may be a little bit biased there. I like all of the modalities, but I think from a learner perspective, that hybrid one really helps to maximize that investment. I love what you pointed out, Caitlyn, that there are challenges with it, right? Being able to get everything scheduled, making sure all the pieces fit, making sure that folks complete their pre-work before they go to class, right? That all of those kinds of things, it doesn't solve every problem, but it certainly makes it a little bit easier, at least for me. We did have a question come through in the Q&A, so thank you for sending that in. I'm going to try to paraphrase it. It's kind of a multi-pronged question that came through here, but the core of it is, as folks are learning and they're not necessarily diving deeper into their current skill set, but maybe training for a different role. And the example here would be someone who is maybe in a sysops role, training or trying to kind of reskill to get into a DevOps role. So as they're doing that, the question here was kind of how important is and do we have ways for folks to practice in kind of that real world environment? So not just a canned example, but are there real world challenges that folks can work on, and how important do we think that would be for folks training for that new role? So I'll open it up to you two.
Yeah, I mean, we have a number of offerings. We have HandsOn Labs, lab challenges, lab playgrounds, and the live version of that is our live lab challenges. So, if someone's looking to make a role switch, my recommendation is figure out what you don't know yet. We give out a baseline assessment where we'll get results back and understand what are the most important domains within that role and what are your skill gaps. Maybe some of that carries over from your previous experience, maybe some of it doesn't. And then what we could do is get very specific about the skills that are missing for you to be this the system engineer. We have the HandsOn Labs where you can then dive in, and I do find that very important. You have people who could just look at courses or watch courses, or the courses are watching them, for a matter of fact. But you need to go in and dive and actually pick up the skills. If you're looking to get certified, you still need those labs because it could get really tricky. Some of those questions, they could have simple toggle questions, and you have no idea because you never went into a lab. Yeah, definitely want to take advantage of live training for all use cases, regardless.
Totally. And one thing I'd add to that too is whenever you're talking about reskilling from one role to another, for example, sysops to DevOps, or whenever you're trying to switch positions or switch roles, it's important to understand, okay, what is the end goal, right? So for example, taking that job description of what do I need to really be successful in this DevOps role, and reverse engineering from there. And to your point, whoever asked this question, I think that the hands-on learning is a really crucial aspect of that. Because it's one thing, again, to have that domain knowledge of, okay, I kind of get what a DevOps engineer does. I sort of understand the concept, but it's another thing entirely to be able to get your hands dirty and really, again, make those mistakes, right? Fail forward, like get in there and play around with it, so that you feel really confident that if you were, placed in that role, you would have the skills necessary to get your hands dirty on the first day.
Love it. Some great answers there. And a little more clarification was coming in through the Q&A. One of the things that the asker is really interested in is like real world examples. And I know at least for our labs, a lot of the labs that we have, especially the lab challenges, are built on some real world examples. Now, as you go into more of the intermediate and the advanced ones, those examples get pretty complex. But we try to keep those aligned with things that you would see in kind of the real world. And then there was also an example about being open for folks bringing in real world examples to the platform. And yeah, like we are very open to hearing from our customers, from our users, what are some of the challenges that they're seeing? And then we can take those concepts and ideas either back to our content team to build out new labs and courses and that sort of stuff. Or one of the things that I've seen happen kind of in this situation is, Brandon mentioned lab playgrounds. So I've heard of folks using our lab playgrounds to do, some of the activities that they found on the web. Like I know, for instance, AWS has a lot of really interesting workshops that you can work on. Well, our lab playground might be a place where you can do some of the key aspects of that workshop. And so you can find some of these externally available ideas, real world examples, and then bring that into the safe space of our labs and do that. So you're not in a production account, you're not risking charging a whole bunch of money to your company, and you can kind of put those safety bumpers on it, but still leveraging that real world experience. Because as you get closer to making that transition, that's a critical piece of it, right? Being able to demonstrate that real world experience and knowledge. So awesome. Thank you for those questions. Appreciate that. Brandon, I want to come back to you with another question. And we were talking about the e-learning, hybrid, and vILT formats. And Caitlyn gave us some great examples of benefits and challenges for that. Can you give us some examples where one of those formats might have outperformed the others in terms of either ROI, engagement, something along those lines?
Yeah, I guess this is a segue from the question that we got asked in the chat. But if you're going to focus on specific skills or project readiness, my recommendation is to go with some kind of live immersive experience. So we have the live lab challenges, we have master classes. Again, so if you want to target specific skills, then that's the way you want to go, so that your users are prepared for whenever those projects come up. The team will be able to learn the new skill. It's concise, and then they get the experience that they need to be successful. Now, if your goal is, as an organization, is to get your users certified, then self-paced is the more successful model to go with, because of the ability to go back, review your exam results, look at the explanations, and then also you have those hands-on labs where you have the access to the student sandbox accounts, where you could go back and, again, just like review what it would be like to be in that console. So it really, I guess the answer depends on the organization, what the end goal is. Is the end goal project readiness? Well, then I recommend a classroom-like setting where your team will be able to dive into a lab together, and you're going through that with an instructor, and you're focused specifically on those skills. But if you're focused on more of like certifications or just getting CPEs, then self-paced is better, because you can pause, take notes, review your explanations, and you still have that hands-on experience. It's just not in that classroom like setting.
Yeah, I'm reminded one of the sessions you and I did recently for a customer, and as we were wrapping up, one of the pieces of feedback was, my brain is full, right? One of the attendees said, my brain is full, right? Because in that modality, there's a lot of information that's coming at you, and you can't pause. You can't necessarily slow things down, take some notes, review some things. So it's great because you get to ask the questions, but it can also be a bit of a fire hose of information that fills your brain up.
Well, I guess you can pause. It would just be a bit awkward.
That's true. That's true. Yeah. So I like that. And I think kind of the takeaway from this question and the one that Caitlyn was addressing earlier is that all of these, there's no perfect answer, right? There's no perfect way to do this. There's always trade-offs. And what I'm hearing from both of you is it kind of depends on those outcomes, those goals that you have for this learning. Is it a project that you're trying to get to? Is it a new feature? Is it a new application? Are you trying to accelerate things and do it quickly? Are you trying to reinforce learning, right? All of these different things might push you to different modalities. And so the answer might be different. Even though you're talking about the same technology, we might choose a different modality based on the situation that we're trying to approach. All right, so along those lines, kind of continuing that vein, Caitlyn, have you seen a diverse set of learning offerings be beneficial to learners at organizations?
Absolutely. And I think it ties in really nicely to everything that we've just been discussing, right? I mean, we talked a little bit about on a personal level, right? Different people learn differently. We've established that part. So having that diverse set of offerings helps us meet learners where they're at and make that experience of learning, engaging and fun. And we talked a little bit about how that's really crucial to learning culture. But if we zoom out a little bit and look more toward the kind of organizational level, right? What you were just mentioning, Jeremy, around the outcomes, I think really comes into play because different modalities will be better suited for different outcomes. I would say largely based on sort of the urgency around them or the timing around them, right? For example, if we have, for example, right now we have a client who's really focused on their AI initiatives and they want to, upskill a certain amount of people on AI basics by this certain deadline or date, right? That's a perfect use case for implementing either an instructor-led or a blended learning format because you have that accountability. It is a little bit like drinking from a fire hose because you're going to learn a lot in a short amount of time. But in order to meet that deadline, it's much better to provide that more structured, kind of rigorous, cohort-based approach where we're constantly giving and getting feedback from our peers so that we can upskill toward that goal within the given timeline, right? Versus if we're just trying to create an amazing culture of learning and provide training ad hoc as a benefit, maybe a different modality makes sense, right? As others have mentioned. So yeah, it's matching the right modality with the right sort of sense of urgency that the situation or the outcome requires. And it ties back, I think, too, to the question that was asked around reskilling, right? Moving someone from one role to another. In that type of instance, you're going to want a more structured, approach, a more hands-on approach, an approach that allows someone to get their hands dirty. So yeah, great point.
Yeah, good, great points in there. And one of the ones that I hear in there, I don't know if that it was mentioned specifically, but is scalability, right? As you're looking at these different ways of offering learning, sometimes that instructor-led doesn't scale to thousands of people, right? Or it may not be cost effective to scale it to thousands of people, whereas the e-learning ones definitely can.
Right. Or the example that Brandon was mentioning earlier, where it's self-paced learning through e-learning with sort of these targeted touch points, either with a CSM, a live instructor who can really bring that learning together and provide sort of those touch points to keep folks on track. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and this is what most companies are starting to realize is that they need to have a diverse set of offering. Eventually, e-learning will get stale. Let's just be honest. It will get stale. It's going to sit there. It's going to be an employee benefit, a nice to have. What you need to do is you have to have some things that will re-engage the users, get them excited about training, get them excited about learning about new products and services. So when you combine those things like the live sessions, then you have this perfect concoction of training and people hitting their deadlines and upskilling and reskilling and people just feeling confident in taking risk and just being happier, retaining.
Yeah, tying that back to what Caitlyn said of creating that psychological safety, that space for folks to experiment and try and maybe fail on a couple of these things, and that's an okay space. I like that. All right, so We kind of talked about a little bit about where we are, a little bit kind of where we're going with things, but I want to come back and talk about some future trends and best practices, really like get concrete on this and dive in. So Brandon, based on what you've been seen from talking with our customers and your knowledge in this space, what are some upcoming trends in corporate cloud training that organizations should be aware of?
I think that it's very simple, and they are focused on skills. The industry is moving towards focus on skills. They want different training modalities that will make their employees' time worthwhile. Blended Learning provides a fully baked training program that uses different, modalities, whether that's live, self-paced, interactive, and you could have this specific to projects that you're working on in the day to day or are coming up on in the horizon. So, more and more customers are moving away from total time spent or consumption as a main metric, and they want to know, well, can you do the job? Can you go in and actually complete this task quickly, ultimately, saving us money in the long term, having a tangible business outcome. Yeah, focus on skills.
I like that. And how are companies, just to kind of follow on with that one, how are companies measuring those skills? What are some of the ways that they're evidencing or getting evidence that their folks are obtaining those skills?
Yeah, so what you need to do is you have to diagnose, right? Before, if you're a doctor, you can't just go in and say, hey, look, here's the medication. I have no idea what the issue is, but here's your medication. Good luck, buddy. So first thing you have to do is you have to diagnose that, right? You got to assign some type of baseline. And going back to psychological safety, if you have a good culture, then a baseline assessment would not, scare anyone away. If anything, they'll be eager to take that baseline because they want to know, what can I work on to get better at my job? And then you can work on customizing the baseline so it's specific to what they need to know. But yeah, first you get a baseline understanding of where the user is at. Then with that data, you assign a training program. Now, once that program is assigned, there's going to be tons of activities, whether those are courses, labs, quizzes, exams. They're gonna start taking those learning activities based on how difficult those activities are and the correctness. You can see points being allocated towards this user's skill profile score, which is a Cloud Academy lingo, but they get a skill profile score that will go up, or if it's something that they previously knew, it could go down. So we're always trying to keep a true measure of what the current skill level is. So we can certainly measure the skills.
I love it. And I know one of the things that I like about our platform is that those skills are demonstrated. So it's demonstrated on an exam by passing the exam or getting questions correct, but it's also demonstrated in those labs to show that you can actually do the thing, right? Not just that I know what an EC2 instance is, but I know how to spin one up and I know some configuration items and I'm able to demonstrate that knowledge. Because like you said, if companies are interested in and focusing on skills and skill attainment, it's not just, can I spell AWS? It's, can I use the things? Can I take that knowledge and leverage it on my day-to-day job, right? Because my team doesn't care that much whether I can quote the right stuff and use the right jargon. They care that they can trust me to solve that ticket.
That's right.
Yeah. All right, Caitlyn, what advice would you give to organizations looking to optimize their cloud training programs for the future?
It's a really good one. And I think I would echo a lot of the points that Brandon just made too around utilizing the tools and technologies that we have with regards to skills intelligence. I think skills are absolutely the way of the future when it comes to corporate tech training, and we should use the tools that we have at our disposal to really take advantage of the data that we can gather around skills. But more specifically, I would go back to the culture of learning, right? I think it all boils down for me to that culture of learning. For organizations, as a takeaway, I would, share with you guys is never stop investing in your people. even if times are tough, right? Even if, training maybe isn't the first thing on your priority list, it always pays off to invest in that healthy learning culture. Because not only are you going to help attract and retain that best talent, you're also going to be able to maximize, your tech talent pool, and tap into tech talent pipelines that did not previously exist, right? A lot of organizations are still having to go out and seek out and buy talent, right? If you can develop that culture of learning, you can really unlock a ton of potential as it relates to creating and cultivating that talent in ways that can really drive innovation. Um, yeah.
Yeah. Is it cheaper to reskill or to, you go out and find an entirely new employee with the skills that are currently there, right? So I think that's what a lot of organizations are starting to figure out, that actually might be more conducive for us to just reskill our employees.
Yeah, I like that. And I know one of our larger customers is talking about that with us about, they're shifting from their own data centers, right? And those folks who are loyal employees and have a lot invested in them and really want to stay working at the company, they aren't going to have a space to do what they do because we're turning off the data centers. So how do we reskill them? And looking at that, offering that cloud training, looking at optimizing that so that those folks can get in, get the knowledge that they need, and get to that next role quickly but efficiently, right? We're not throwing all of these things that they already know at them, but we're also not making too many assumptions about what they know coming in. Um,
And just to add to that, Jeremy, too, I think, for example, having that sort of pathway in place already for that career mobility, and for that culture of learning really helps organizations pivot during times like this when, say, AI suddenly comes, hot onto the scene and everyone needs to develop new skills, right? If you have that culture of learning and you have those sort of pathways already in place, it makes it so much easier for you to be able to tap into your existing talent and upskill around those types of goals, versus an organization that doesn't have that culture of learning is really struggling to have to go out and source that talent and come up with new ways to create it.
Yeah, it's a great point. And AI is one of those disruptor technologies, right? That's thrown a wrench in a lot of things. So understanding where it fits and how do we learn about it and where do we go to get our information, since it's changing so quickly. And one of the things I would add to your answer on this one about optimizing that cloud training is recognizing that cloud training optimization is a journey, not a destination, right? Just like a lot of things in tech, I am a programmer. I know how to write code, but that's not where I stop. I have to learn all these other technologies because we're constantly changing. And so I think as we're thinking about these cloud training programs, we do want to set them up. We want to deploy them. We want people to use them, but they're not a one and done. It is an optimization type of thing where we're going to need to revisit those periodically and say, do we still have the right technologies in here? Is any of this content stale? Should people be learning these other pieces? And AI is a great reminder of that one, that, right, we're going to need to mix that into a lot of different learning paths moving forward, I think. All right. So looking in the question and answer panel, I think we've gotten all of those. If anybody has any final questions for us, please go ahead and throw those into the Q&A section here in GoToWebinar. And to buy them time to type out their questions, I have a final question for both of you. What is one actionable piece of advice that you would give companies or the folks attending today to enhance their corporate cloud training programs?
All right, yeah, so active recall. It's very simple. If you say you're going to do something, if you're working on something, if you train on anything, you should augment that with some type of live, hands-on, immersive experience with your teams. It's going to make it more sticky. They're going to retain the information, retain the training much longer, and then the project will be completed more efficiently and more effectively, right? So if you're going to train, again, you have to augment any training with some type of immersive hands-on experience. So this way you can work on the active recall. making it sticky for your users in the future.
Love that. And I would add to that too and build on what Jeremy mentioned earlier around optimization. I would say ask for feedback from your learners frequently and consistently, right? Just because something was the perfect way of doing it, 2 weeks ago doesn't mean it's the perfect way of doing it now. So continue to ask for feedback and continue feeding into that feedback loop. And partner with your tech learning partners, right? Companies like us, like Cloud Academy, we really do spend a lot of time investing into understanding the latest trends and tools and in tech L&D. And we really want to support you and be strategic partners. So lean into that relationship.
I love it. Yeah, leverage those resources that you have available. That's great advice. I like that. For me, the one actionable piece of advice that I would give folks is don't be afraid to try something new, right? There's the trend, right? Sometimes where we kind of have that sunk cost of, well, we've already got this built and this is the way that it is and it's been working okay for us. Sometimes what you need to do is throw something new in there. Think about it a little bit differently. Bring in, a partner to help see things differently and ask some different questions for you. So my piece of advice is don't be afraid to try something new. All right, so we are just about at time. So thank you for joining us today for our webinar. A quick reminder that we did record this webinar and we're going to share it with you in the next 36 hours once it gets all processed and ready to go. Also, you're going to receive a quick survey after the webinar, and we'd love to hear your feedback. Good, bad, and ugly, we'd love to hear it. If something we said today grabs your attention, please reach out to us, and we'd be happy to continue the conversation. So Caitlyn and Brandon, wanted to open it up. Any parting words for everybody as we get ready to close?
No, thank you all for being here. It's been a great conversation.
Yeah, likewise. If you have any questions, you can reach me at brandon.henry@cloudacademy.com. I'm more than happy to help.
Awesome.
Same here.
So send Caitlyn an email at brandon.henry.
I should have clarified. Yeah, Caitlyn.funk@cloudacademy.com.
Yeah, and I'm jeremy.price@cloudacademy.com. Thanks everybody for joining us today, and thank you Brandon and Caitlyn for sharing your expertise. Appreciate it. Engage in conversation as always, and thanks to all of our attendees, and we hope to be chatting with you again soon about all of these great topics around hybrid, e-learning, and vILT. Thanks everybody.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Caitlyn.
Thanks, guys.